Welcome to Heartbreaker, your love radio.
Juliana was never one to believe in destiny, but meeting Henry in a small cafe in the suburbs of Seattle was like an unexpected spark. He worked there while completing his studies in marketing, always smiling at the customers and serving their favorite drinks. She, on the other hand, was still dealing with the end of a tumultuous relationship and dedicated herself to her work as an administrative assistant. One morning, Henry noticed Juliana sitting alone, engrossed in a book. He approached with a smile. "Are you enjoying the story?" he asked, pulling up a chair. She looked up, surprised, and replied with a hesitant smile, "Yes, actually. It's a detective novel. Do you like this kind of reading?" "I've never been a big fan of romances, but detective stories intrigue me," he replied, striking up a conversation. From that first casual encounter, the conversations between the two became frequent, evolving into weekend walks by the lake and impromptu dinners. They discovered similarities in musical tastes and differences that enriched their perspectives. Henry loved to cook, while Juliana preferred to explore local restaurants. They both loved old movies, especially noir and Hollywood classics. On one of those walks in the park, Henry took her hand and pulled her close, looking into her eyes. "Jules, I feel like life has given me a second chance with you." Juliana smiled, feeling her heart race. "Maybe we're finding the second chance we deserve." 2 years later, on the small terrace of their apartment, Henry proposed to her. "I want to build a home with you, Jules. Let's turn our dreams into reality together." Juliana, with tears in her eyes, accepted without hesitation. A few months later, they held a modest ceremony with friends and family. Over time, they bought an apartment and were blessed with the arrival of Valerie, a little girl with golden curls and bright eyes who brought even more joy to the couple. "I don't know how life could get any better than this," Juliana said to Henry, enveloped in the tranquility of the moment as they watched Valerie play on the living room rug. "I can't imagine anything more perfect," Henry replied, wrapping his arms around her. Juliana and Henry divided their life between work, taking care of Valerie, and the few moments left for themselves. She left early every day, battling traffic to get to the office where she worked as an administrative assistant. Henry, after his long nights as a telemarketing supervisor, spent the mornings with Valerie, making the most of his time with his daughter before taking her to daycare. One morning, while Henry was feeding Valerie cereal in the kitchen, Juliana appeared dressed for work with her bag on her shoulder. "Love, don't forget to pack an extra change of clothes in her backpack today," as she reminded him, grabbing an apple from the counter. "Don't worry, I won't forget," he replied, distracted as he wiped a dribble of milk from the little one's chin. Juliana gave them both a quick kiss and was already at the door when Valerie, with her mouth full of cereal, shouted, "Mommy, kiss." Juliana laughed, turned back, and planted a kiss on the top of Valerie's head. "Behave today, young lady. And you too, Henry." He smiled and waved as she left. "I'll try, but I can't promise." The nights were the only time they had together. After putting Valerie to bed, they shared a cheap wine on the couch and talked about their days. Henry talked about the goals and pressures of work, while Juliana vented about the office's relentless demands. Today, Johnson wanted me to redo last week's reports as if I had nothing else to do," she complained, resting her feet on Henry's lap. "I know how it is. And did you hear Mark complaining in the last meeting? It's like he lives in a different world." Henry chuckled and shook his head. "Oh well, there's always one of those, isn't there?" Later, as their worries seemed to dissipate with wine and exhaustion, Juliana laid her head on Henry's shoulder and, with a dreamy sigh, whispered, "It might sound crazy, but I feel like we could handle another child. Valerie would love a little brother." Do you think we could?" Henry asked, thoughtfully. "I mean, it's something we've wanted for a long time, but our routine is already so intense." Juliana looked up at him. If we can handle all of this together, I think we could manage. And just imagine, our home finally filled with the laughter of children. Yeah, that's true. Henry smiled, thoughtfully, squeezing her hand. Maybe it's time to start planning for that. On a damp and silent early morning, the phone rang, jolting Juliana from a deep sleep. With a bewildered expression, she answered, listening to words that sent a cold chill through her chest. Henry had been in a motorcycle accident on his way home from work. He was in the hospital with a severely injured leg and would need surgery. After calling their friend and neighbor Tracy to stay with Valerie, Juliana rushed to the hospital, where she found Henry lying in a bed with his leg in a cast, scratches on his face, and a weary expression. He tried to smile when he saw her enter.
Just.
Sorry to wake you. She approached and held his hand tightly. Don't apologize, love. How are you? Doing okay, considering the circumstances, he replied, trying to reassure her. They're going to need to do surgery to fix the leg, but they said it'll be okay. She looked into his eyes, seeking the truth behind the bravery. Are you really going to be okay? I will be. Don't worry. Despite his optimistic words, the surgery proved to be more complicated than anticipated, requiring an extended recovery. Henry had to remain in the hospital for a few weeks to avoid complications. Juliana divided her days between caring for Valerie, working, and visiting Henry. Sometimes, it felt like she was stuck in an endless cycle of rushing and worrying, but when she found herself by Henry's bedside in the hospital, she encouraged him with a smile. Colleagues asked about you today, she remarked during one visit. They sent their well wishes and said you have to recover soon. Good to know I'm being remembered, Henry replied, trying to lighten the mood. Juliana smiled faintly and lowered her eyes, searching for the right words. I wish you were home with us, you know? Valerie misses you. I miss you. I know, he said, holding her hands. And I'll be back, Jules. We just need to be patient. However, things took a turn for the worse when Henry developed an infection after surgery, further prolonging his hospital stay. Juliana nearly collapsed upon hearing the news, but she remained steadfast, supporting Henry and Valerie while maintaining her work routine. She was also comforted by Tracy and other friends who volunteered to take care of Valerie when she needed to spend more time at the hospital. Finally, after 3 long weeks, the doctor announced that Henry was out of danger and could go home soon. Juliana felt a weight lift off her shoulders upon hearing those words. That night, she held Henry's hand tenderly and spoke softly. I knew you would pull through. It's all going to be okay, he said, smiling for the first time in days. We'll get through this together, she replied firmly, stroking his face. We always do. Exhaustion was written all over Juliana's face when she arrived home after another hectic day at work and a visit to the hospital to see Henry. She found Valerie with Tracy, who was taking care of her for a few hours in the evening. How was she? Juliana asked, trying to smile. Perfectly fine, as always. Don't worry, Jules, Tracy replied, giving her a concerned look. And how are you? Tired, Juliana admitted with a sigh. But we'll get through this. Tracy gave a reassuring nod and, after leaving Valerie with Juliana, bid her goodbye. Shortly after closing the door, Juliana noticed a package left on the floor in the entryway, partially hidden behind a vase. It was addressed from someone named Camila. Upon opening it, she found a provocative red lingerie accompanied by a note. You these days away from you have been torture. We'll be together again soon. Juliana furrowed her brow, confused. Who was this Camila? And why was this gift at her doorstep? She put the lingerie back in the package and took it to the hospital the next day, ready to share her confusion with Henry. When she showed him the note and described the contents, he immediately reacted with a nervous look. Jules, I have nothing to do with this, he quickly said, avoiding her eyes. I know, but I found it strange and wanted to tell you, She replied, trying to read his expression. I don't know why you're concerned. It could just be some delivery person who left it at the wrong address. Maybe, but how did you know it was red lingerie? I didn't mention the color. He fell silent, his jaw tense. Perhaps you mentioned it, he finally said, averting his gaze. It doesn't mean anything. Are you sure there's nothing you're not telling me? She insisted. I don't know what you're imagining, Juliana. I'm stuck here in the hospital. Do you really think I have something to hide? She swallowed hard, hesitating between believing or continuing to question. Okay, maybe I'm being paranoid. After exchanging a few words about Valerie and her recovery, Juliana said goodbye, but couldn't shake off the uncomfortable feeling that Henry's reaction had left her with. The way he became defensive, his quick responses, and the way he avoided looking at her didn't seem normal. That night, Juliana tossed and turned in bed, while thinking about what she could do to uncover the truth. She didn't want to doubt Henry, but his nervousness about the mysterious gift had left her with a suspicion that was hard to ignore. Juliana spent the night awake, her mind running in circles as she remembered Henry's nervous reaction upon hearing about the package. There was something wrong. The next day, after dropping Valerie off at daycare, she went to the grocery store near her house, where she knew the manager, Paul, by sight. Hi, Paul, could you help me with something? I need to see the footage from the cameras facing the entrance of my house. Paul furrowed his brow, confused. Is something wrong? I received a strange package yesterday, and my husband is in the hospital, as she explained quickly, trying not to go into too much detail. I think the camera might have captured something. He nodded, agreeing to show her the footage. After locating the approximate date and time, Paul left Juliana alone in the office as she analyzed the images. She saw the front door of the house, the wind rustling the branches of the trees, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until, advancing through the images, a car parked on the other side of the street. The door opened, and a woman approached her front door, carrying a bag. She left the package on the ground and quickly walked away, looking around before getting into a car parked a few meters away. Juliana focused on her face. She looked familiar, but she couldn't place her. Let's go back in time. I want to see the footage from days before the accident, she thought. And she rewound the videos to a week before. Watching the recordings from a late afternoon, she saw Henry getting out of a car with the same woman. He looked around as he escorted her through the gate. The two entered through the front door. Juliana's blood boiled, and she took a deep breath, trying not to scream. There was the confirmation she feared. It wasn't a simple mistaken delivery or an error. Henry had brought another woman into their home long before the accident. She turned off the monitor, breathing heavily. She didn't know how long she stood there, staring at the black screen, until Paul walked in. Are you okay, Juliana? She forced a smile and nodded. Yes, thank you, Paul. That's enough. She left the grocery store, her eyes burning with tears. The woman in the video could easily be Camila. And Henry had taken her into the house where they had built a life together. He had shattered her trust and destroyed her sense of security. After spending some time wandering the city, Juliana decided to visit Henry at the hospital, determined to hear a confession. When she entered the room, he was flipping through a magazine. He looked up and smiled at her, but his smile faltered when he noticed her expression. Jules, is something wrong? You cheated on me, she said bluntly. And you had the audacity to bring her into our home. What are you talking about? Henry tried to play it off, setting the magazine aside. You're imagining things. I saw the footage from the camera, Henry. I saw you opening the gate for her and leading her inside. He fell silent, his face drained of color. How could you do this? Her voice trembled with emotion. You were with me all these years, making plans and building a family, but you cheated on me with someone else. Jules, please, I can explain. Don't try to lie again. I saw the footage. You were together before the accident. And you had the audacity to bring her into our home, where we built our life. Jules, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice filled with desperation. It wasn't serious. I made a mistake, but I still love you. Please, give me another chance. I don't want to hear another word from you. When I leave here, don't expect to find me. She left before Henry could say anything else. She felt betrayed and disoriented. After leaving the hospital, Juliana felt like everything around her was falling apart. She picked up Valerie from daycare and returned home, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter, even though her heart was in pieces. She put on a movie for Valerie to watch, then went up to her room, trying to figure out what to do. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. On one hand, she wanted to believe that Henry still had something to say, something that could justify or explain the betrayal. On the other hand, she knew there was no excuse for what she saw. The decision she made there was painful, but she saw no other way forward. The next morning, she returned to the hospital, determined to put an end to it once and for all. Henry greeted her with a nervous smile.
Jules, I'm sorry.
I know you're hurt, but please, let's talk about this. She approached the bed, her eyes cold and fixed on him. You lied to me, she began, keeping her voice steady. I saw the woman entering our house. So don't try to convince me there was no betrayal. It's not what you think. He raised his hands defensively, trying to argue. As she's just a friend, we just talked, there was nothing between us. Juliana narrowed her eyes, the hurt overflowing. A friend? A friend that you brought into our house while I was working. He opened his mouth, but found no words. I did everything to build a life with you, she continued, holding back tears. And you betrayed not only me, but also our daughter. I'm sorry, but I'm not going through this again. Juliana, please, he pleaded, trying to get up but was hindered by the pain in his leg. Don't leave. Think about Valerie, we can get through this. Juliana took a deep breath, her lips trembling. I've already thought about her. And that's why I'm leaving. She walked out of the room, ignoring Henry's desperate pleas. Back at home, she spent a few hours packing her bags, packing only the essentials for her and Valerie. She had friends in another city who would take them in until she could find a place of her own. As she packed, Valerie came into the room and found her busy. Where are we going, Mommy? As she asked, hugging her teddy bear. We're going on a little trip, sweetheart, Juliana replied, forcing a smile. You like going on trips, don't you? Valerie nodded, and Juliana hugged her, trying to comfort her. Within a few hours, they closed the door and left, leaving behind the memories of a life that, for Juliana, now felt like a shadow. She knew there would be a long road ahead, but her priority was to rebuild Valerie's life and keep her away from the pain and disappointment that Henry had caused. The new life in Portland started slowly for Juliana and Valerie. In the first few days, Juliana could barely get out of bed, lacking the strength to face the changes and still adapting to the city. Her friend Rachel, who had temporarily taken them in, took care of Valerie, while Juliana found a new job and looked for an apartment. Finally, after 2 weeks, Juliana managed to find a small apartment and soon moved in with Valerie. She was far from feeling at home, but she knew that the first step was to rebuild a safe space for both of them. At night, when Valerie was asleep, Juliana would sit in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. A part of her still missed Henry, thinking about the happy moments they had shared. But the image of the woman entering their house remained engraved in her memory, a symbol of the pain and betrayal he had caused. On one particularly difficult night, she took out the package with the red lingerie from the drawer. She unfolded it slowly and held it in front of her, the dim light from the lamp revealing the lace and provocative fabric. Rachel entered the room and saw Juliana looking at the piece. What's this? She asked, frowning. The lingerie I found. The one that was delivered to Camila, Juliana replied, not taking her eyes off it. Rachel approached, watching her closely. Why do you still have it? Juliana sighed, feeling anger and disgust swirling in her mind. I don't know. Maybe it's a reminder. Something that won't let me forget how foolish I was to blindly trust him. Rachel sat beside her and placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. It's not foolishness to trust someone you love, Jules. But you shouldn't let this piece be your final memory of Henry. He made a choice, and you don't deserve to live in its shadows. Juliana held the lingerie tighter. I still feel so hurt, Rachel. I loved that man, and he threw it all away. I know, Rachel said softly. But you have Valerie, and she needs a strong mother. And she needs someone who won't let this pain define her life. Juliana nodded, slowly folding the lingerie and placing it back in the package. One day, maybe I'll be able to laugh at this. Laugh at how tacky it is and how he wasn't worthy of me. And you will, Rachel affirmed, enveloping her in a hug. And then, you'll be able to find someone who won't betray your trust. The call came unexpectedly, weeks after Juliana and Valerie moved to Portland. Henry had been discharged from the hospital and was determined to try to win Juliana back. When she answered, his voice sounded tired and anxious. Jules, please, let me see you, he pleaded. I need to explain everything. Juliana knew this would happen. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath before responding. I'm in Portland, Henry. And I'm not willing to listen to more lies. They're not lies, he argued, urgently. Meet me. I just need a few minutes. Valerie deserves at least that. Juliana was silent for a few seconds. She knew she shouldn't give in, but the mention of their daughter made her hesitate. Fine, she finally said. Let's meet. But Henry, don't expect too much from me. 2 days later, they met near the playground where Valerie was playing, far enough away so the girl wouldn't hear them. Henry approached cautiously, still limping slightly. Thank you for coming, Jules. She crossed her arms, standing her ground. Just tell me what you want, Henry. I made a mistake, he began, his voice low and trembling. A terrible mistake. And I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know that I still love you. She stared at him, her eyes cold. You had the chance to show your love. You had time to think about the consequences of your actions, yet you still chose to betray me. He tried to approach, but she took a step back. Please, listen to me, he pleaded. It was a moment of weakness. I was lost, but I never stopped loving you. We can find a way back together. I can be the husband you deserve. No, Henry. I can't believe in you anymore. You broke my trust when you brought another woman into our home, with Valerie there. That's something I can't forget. Henry hung his head, unable to find a convincing response. Please, Jules. Give me a second chance. Juliana shook her head slowly. This conversation is over, Henry. Oh, and take this. Juliana pulled the lingerie out of her bag and threw it in his face. Henry remained silent as she walked away and called for Valerie. He watched as the two of them walked away together, his heart heavy with the harsh reality that he had lost Juliana's trust and love forever. Gradually, Juliana and Valerie's new life took shape. The little girl began to adjust to her new school, making friends and delighting in the neighborhood playground. Juliana found a job as an administrative assistant at a local company, where the atmosphere was welcoming, and she could balance her professional responsibilities with caring for her daughter. Despite the small victories, Juliana still struggled with the sadness and anger from Henry's betrayal. Some days, she felt suffocated by the memories of her former life. On others, she focused on the small strides she was making in creating a new home for Valerie and herself. One afternoon, while she was in the office, she received a phone call from Henry. After a brief hesitation, she answered. Jules, I just wanted to know how you and Valerie are doing." Juliana took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "We're adjusting, Henry. Valerie is doing well." Do you think we could ever talk?" Henry asked, his voice hesitant. Juliana fell silent for a moment. "I don't know what we could talk about, Henry. You made a decision that destroyed our life together, and I won't allow myself to go back to the past." He sighed on the other end of the line. "I know.
I'm sorry, Jules.
Truly. I can't live off your guilt," she responded firmly. "I need to move forward and be strong for our daughter. I hope you find your way, but my path is different." She hung up, her heart racing. The call had confirmed that the past was behind her and that, as much as she loved Henry, she couldn't continue living under the shadow of betrayal. Rachel appeared at her desk shortly after, as if sensing something was wrong. "Are you okay, Jules?" Juliana smiled and nodded. "Yes, I am. I think I'm finally starting to feel ready to leave all this behind." As the months passed, Juliana began to get more involved in community activities and meet new people. She and Valerie started taking walks in the parks and visiting museums, filling their weekends with simple adventures. One night, as they sat on the couch eating popcorn, Valerie asked, "Hey, Mommy, aren't you sad anymore?" Juliana hugged her tenderly. Sometimes, I do feel sad, my love. But with you by my side, I am much happier." She knew that the love she had for Henry was real, but that her trust had been broken in a way that couldn't be repaired.